I'm Maureen Conway, a Vice President at the Aspen Institute and Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the series Back to the Future of Work, Revisiting the Past and Shaping the Future. In this series, we're gathering reflections and insights from a diverse set of leaders and innovators who have been engaged in questions about changes in technology, shifts in global business trends, and the implications for the shape of work now and into the future. I want to thank Anmol Chada and Natalie Foster, Senior Fellows with our Future of Work initiative, who've been curating this series for us. And just by way of introduction, a decade ago, the Economic Opportunities Program had what I think was our first conversation on the future of work. We hosted a conversation looking at sort of the issues of platform work and the sharing economy, and it was a time when automation was raising concerns about potential job loss, maybe significant job loss, but also how technology might be changing how work is intermediated, right? That employer-employer relationship was kind of being intermediated by technology. And 10 years later, we're sort of looking at a new tech and future of work moment, right? With AI really, bringing big transformations to how work is done and what kind of work humans do and what kind of work we rely on technology for. And so we thought this was a good time to sort of think about that previous round of tech transformation and the conversations we had then, and to kind of reflect a little bit on those past conversations. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What did we learn from that experience? But fundamentally, what is the future of work that we want? And how do we think technology can help us get there? So I'm so glad, Asutosh, that you're joining us for this conversation today, and I know you have a lot to bring to this conversation. Asutosh is McKinsey & Company's global leader of firm strategy, responsible for shaping the strategic vision, accelerating the firm's pace of innovation, and evolving the partnership model as McKinsey turns 100 in 2026. He is currently an active board member of the Aspen Institute, the Brookings Institution, and the Field Museum. Thank you so much, Asutosh, for joining us today. You and I had the chance a while back, actually, to talk about our common interests in economic mobility and ideas for how do we build an economy that really includes everybody, creates opportunity for everybody. So I'm wondering if you just want to start by just sharing a little bit about yourself and your interest in this topic of the future of work.
Maureen, great to be with you, and it's really been a real privilege to join the Board of Trustees for the Aspen Institute, and thank you for having me here today. My background in McKinsey has actually spanned several chapters, and there have been some common threads across those chapters, but those chapters have been, I think I started with a firm overseas in India, and I traveled across the world for the first few years. There was a phase in which I was leading up our operations practice, then our advanced industries practice, and then North America. And currently, I'm now leading an effort around strategy and innovation for McKinsey globally. Right? I think that's the common thread to all of this has really been technology, the impact of technology on what we do around value creation for institutions, and the economic impact and job creation. So glad to be with you, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So, and McKinsey has been such an important voice in this conversation on the future of work. Your research and has been really, I think eye-opening for many people. The company's reports on how technology would affect employment were widely cited, very influential. As you think back on that conversation sort of a decade ago and what has unfolded since then, are there things that stand out to you as issues that maybe were overlooked or on the other side, are there sort of like predictions that were just spot on and are like, we just got that right?
Maureen, I would say that we got the direction right. We probably got the speed and the velocity wrong, is the way I'd describe it. A decade ago, we knew that technology was going to be a force for change in this particular decade. And we knew that in many different, from many different ways, right? I think we talked about, about a decade ago, we were talking about, the advent of digital and analytics. I think the thing that has really surprised everyone, I would say, has been the impact of AI and how AI has really started to take over and in many ways now really dominates the conversation, whether you're in a room with CEOs, whether you're in a room with board members, whether you're in a room with public sector leaders. I think the conversation has now gravitated towards AI. And I think it started with obviously with ChatGPT and the advent of Gen AI. In 2025, the use of agents is where I think a lot of the conversation is focusing. And I think that the direction around the fact that technology will actually have a profound impact, I think we all talked about that, we knew that. The specifics of how it was going to do this, whether it was generative AI, the use of large language models, and now increasingly small language models, how will agents actually work side by side with human beings to help us do what we are trying to do better, safer, faster? I think some of those conversations, I think we are getting a lot more smarter and a lot more educated now.
Yeah, great. Let's dig into that a little bit. As we think about like, are there things we can do better, safer, faster? You spend a lot of time, obviously, with different companies thinking about how they use technology and what that means in terms of how that influences work. And I'm just wondering if there's, specific examples that you would lift up about things that have gone particularly well in terms of, using technology at work and also, of course, if there are things that you would say, well, that's a lesson learned maybe on maybe how not to do it.
Yeah, Maureen, I would say that by and large about, in our conversations, I hear a couple of dominant themes today. The first is like the vast majority of CEOs, 90% of the CEOs would say in private that they have invested a lot in technology but have not fundamentally seen the value creation from technology. So that's a dichotomy, right? Value creation in terms of everyone wrote a business case when they made the technology investments and those benefits haven't panned out. Second, though, I think as we look at where the opportunities really are going forward, I think we see it in four areas in particular, I think, which will actually drive, I think, a significant portion. First is any interaction as it relates to your customers, right? I think companies typically, whether you're a business to consumer, business to business, or call it customer operations. Second is around sales and marketing. And that comes in the idea of around personalization, for example, which is how do you deliver an experience that's uniquely tailored to an individual. The third is actually software engineering, where I think we've seen like big improvements around software productivity. And the last thing I would say is R&D and the use of digital twins to be able to reduce time to market, to be able to launch new products by as much as like 40 to 50%, and to be able to get a whole lot more done. Those are the four areas in which we are seeing a lot of business value. But I think my previous caveat still holds, which is a lot of CEOs are still today struggling to be able to fully realize the benefits of technology in a way that they'd like to.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I'm wondering, I'm wondering also if you think about that also on the work experience side as well, like in terms of, I know it's not necessarily your job to think about like how do I advance the interests of workers, but in terms of how technology is influencing the opportunities to work, the work experience, I'm just curious what you think has gone well in that realm and whether there are any company practices you'd point to that have been particularly also effective in helping workers adapt to technology.
So, Maureen, I think workers have now been adapting to the use of technology for several decades, right? I think you go back and look at the use of different types of when Excel spreadsheets came up, everybody was worried it's going to drive a whole bunch of job loss. Instead, what it is, what drove a lot more Excel, right? I think as opposed to job losses. So I think workers have continued to adopt to technology over many years. I would say in the current incarnation of what we are seeing around the use of AI, I think the biggest thing it will likely do is it actually upskills individuals and helps them do what they're going to do a lot better. So this use of agents, as I talked about it, I think about half of the work that each one of us does today, I think can potentially be done faster, better, cheaper. But with the use of agents, which means that if half of my work can be done better, doesn't mean that the job necessarily goes away. But what happens is the way in which the job actually, you do your job actually changes. So in terms of, for example, when I have to go and see a client today and I start to prepare for a meeting, it would typically have taken me like a certain amount of preparation to be able to do that. Now what happens is with the use of Gen AI and others, I think the ability to look at and say, how has the CEO been talking about how they've been doing from the standpoint of the investor presentations, what have the last few earnings calls been, etc. I think that actually the use of that information is now complete. We can actually get that done a lot faster and better. So it actually makes the conversation more effective. It doesn't necessarily take it away, doesn't necessarily replace anyone's job.
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting. And I'm just curious, just, as we sort of think about like where we are in this current moment and where we're going, I'm wondering, as I mentioned when we started, like, I think a lot of the conversation 10 years ago was about automation and replacement, right? Driverless trucks, we're going to put truck drivers out of a job and all of those kinds of things. I'm wondering if you see, like, how would you contrast sort of the AI transformation with that earlier transformation and, just thinking about sort of similarities and differences in terms of its impact on work?
So I think that the impact on our work is going to be quite profound. I think as we go forward, I think it will change practically how every role is done. I think that I would separate that from what does that imply in terms of job rotation and job losses, right? I think my own view is that we are understating the impact that technology and the use of AI in particular will have on our day to day, and I say that for every one of us, how that changes. I think that when you think about this and say about half of what you do is going to be very different in 3 to 5 years' time, that's actually quite a profound shift. And I think that it basically implies that each one of us have the opportunity now to reflect on how we truly, truly add value, as opposed to the more mechanical, repetitive aspects of what we do. And that will hold across different professions, it'll hold across different job classes, etc. I think it often also leads to this conversation around what is this, will this actually take away a lot of jobs, etc. And that part, I think that technology over time has proven that it actually creates more jobs than it actually takes away. The nature of the job it creates are different than the nature of the jobs it replaces. So I think we've seen nothing right now which says that that's going to be any different at this point in time, though there's lots of projections out there around doomsday projections out there around how it's going to collectively drive a lot of job losses.
Yeah, great. I'm also curious, I just wanted to go back to your comment on value creation, sort of that you'd been hearing CEOs say that they invest in technology, but they haven't really seen the value necessarily. Do you see that calculus also sort of like, how would you contrast sort of the investment in kind of automation technology of a previous era with kind of the AI opportunities now? Do you see, I guess I'm wondering if you see that calculus changing a little bit as we move into this AI world.
So I think let me go back and maybe talk about that two levels. At the macro level, at the country level, or that of the United States, and then I'll talk about it at the company level. One of the single most important drivers of success for the United States has been the labor productivity and the rate at which the United States has driven labor productivity. And you go back and look at different periods of time and said, how high was that when it was high enough? And it was about 2.4 points a year, right? Which is a standard calculation. When we went back and looked at this time frame from 2005 to 2019, pre-COVID, we deliberately ended at pre-COVID, so it wouldn't be that there won't be any distortions because of the pandemic. What we realized is that number had actually dropped from 2.5 down to about 1.4, and you look at it and say that's a few basis points. Is that significant? It's actually very, very significant. And the delta between the two, if you got it back up to that level, would have been $10 trillion of an cumulative $10 trillion of GDP to the U.S. economy. Think of that as roughly $15,000 of additional household income every year for a household. So productivity really, really matters. But we saw that technology, this is the phase in which I'm describing, the 1.4 points of productivity growth in the United States, which is one of the most productive economies on the planet. The fact that technology actually did not boost productivity, we started to see that even at the macro level, at the country level at that point in time. And then when we go back and look at it and say, when we talk to CEOs, and we've done this exercise, and I've done this exercise, a couple of different times, with Chatham House rules, when you say, for those of CEOs who've actually made significant investments in technology but have not seen the benefits, I think typically 90% of the CEOs have raised their hand and say they're very unhappy or dissatisfied with it.
Wow, that is so interesting. Thank you. That was very helpful. And so I wanted to now, you mentioned earlier, sort of, there's lots of predictions out there. So I wanted to invite yours. Can't talk about future work without having some speculation. So as you think about where we are with AI today and sort of previous disruptions, like I guess I'm just wondering what stands out to you as some of the key concerns, like, given our previous experience with technology introduction, what are some of the key things you think we should, be maybe a little concerned about, keeping our eye on?
So perhaps, Maureen, let me start. I think let me start with the promise and let me start with the pause, right? I think let me hit both of those. I think the promise of technology, particularly AI, is going to be that it can actually help us boost labor productivity again. And why is this important? Once again, I go back and say that at the economy level, GDP growth is a function of changes in productivity times changes in population growth. Therefore, productivity growth is very, very important. And based on the maths that we had done, if you look just at generative AI, which is a sliver of AI, we thought that this could actually drive about half a point of incremental productivity growth over a period of time, so that which is actually quite significant. Now, that's the real potential, that the productivity improvement that then drives GDP, that drives economic wealth creation in a way that's inclusive. I think on the pause side, or the things to get right side, I would put two big things in that category. The first one is really the thoughtful adoption and scaling of technology, right? I think, how do you actually adopt it? How do you scale it inside institutions in a way that's highly that's thoughtful, that is really focused on value creation? And the second part of it, which is now a big discussion, is really around how do you do this in a way that really drives trust. One of the factors within that we're starting to see in AI is that because of the use of fake AI and others, it has really led to an erosion of trust, because you have a lot of fakes in there. So I think that's going to be the other difficult part. I think we'll solve the first one. I think the second one, in many ways, is going to be a much tougher problem for us to solve.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I'm wondering if that trust gap, because I think we see that societally in a variety of ways, right? And I'm wondering, as you think about, I guess that's a problem, I think, as you're sort of shaping it, that we don't really know how to solve right now. And I guess I'm wondering if there's particular areas where you'd be looking to see sort of more investigation, research, like how do we start to break that down and figure out what it is that we don't know that we need to know to start to make progress on that?
I think that's a really hard one, Maureen. I wish I had a three-part recommendation on
I
how
wish
we
you
solve.
did too.
I think that how we solve for trust. The reality is none of us do. I think we'll find out more, right, based upon this. But I do believe that I think at some point, if we don't solve the trust issue, it becomes the single most important gating factor to the further scaling of technology.
Yeah. And I'm wondering sort of, as we think about this, and I really do appreciate that you sort of highlighted this trust issue, because I think it's not an issue, even in our previous conversations around, technology and work, that we weren't really thinking about some of these things. And I think we had sort of I would sort of say, like a very kind of deterministic view of the future of work. It was sort of like a engineering calculation, what it was going to be. And I'm wondering if you think, now that I think there is sort of more recognition of some of the more human sides of this, I'm wondering if you agree with sort of that assessment that it was kind of maybe too deterministic a little bit before, and what your thoughts are about sort of if you could, rather than analyze it that way, if you could sort of say as a human, like, what is the future of work that we want to have, and how do we start to have that conversation? Like how would you characterize that?
I think, well, it's a great question. I go back and look at, some of what we have learned about what really humans want, right? I think if you pull back up and go back, not just the last couple of years, but I think go back prior to that, fundamentally, I think what we're looking for has not changed. If you're in the category of highly skilled worker, and I think there's great research on this, including from Daniel Fink. I refer back to his book where he talks about it's about mastery. It's about having a craft. It's about getting really good at something. It's about the autonomy, or at least the degrees of freedom to be able to pursue your passion. And the last one is actually a purpose. It's mastery, it's autonomy, it's purpose. And I think that's the core of what I think humans look up to. And that actually has resonated. That has actually struck with me, especially for knowledge workers. Now, you can look at it, and different segments will value different things very, very differently. And then the core of this is, if we look at a world in the future, how can we actually get to be even more thoughtful, even more targeted, even more surgical? How it's the core of what we're looking for is not going to change, but the how we do it might actually change, right? So the years will start to embed technology into the core of what we are doing, but hopefully the core, the aspects of what we are looking to do is not going to change. So
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that, and I'm gonna come to my last question here, because I really appreciate you bringing in sort of the idea of purpose and work, and how important that is in terms of building the kind of work we want, because it is such a fundamental part of life, right? So there's Freud's famous comment that love and work are the cornerstones of our humanness. And I think as business leaders, as leaders in our economy, in our world, I'm wondering, because you're on the board of the Aspen Institute, we also talk a lot about what are the values that should be driving leaders as they lead in this time. And as you think about how we build a future of work that is going to be good for working people, good for our economy, good for our society, what are the values you think that are the touchstones that should guide us in trying to build that future?
I think Maureen, it's a great question. It's a difficult question. I think if you think about values, I think individuals have values, institutions have values. I think different parts of society have their values. So I think that maybe rather than it'll be tough for me to say whether the values itself will change. But the thing that I think will become important is the reaffirmation of those values and the importance of those values, and continuing to keep values front and center, and having that provide us the rubric to guide our day-to-day actions, I think will become even more critical, because we are going to be confronted with more choices, and hopefully as we make those choices, we are going to be guided by the things that really matter, that is core to our DNA, who we are. And it does come back to our values at that point in time. I don't know whether the values themselves, in terms of things that we really care for, right, are going to fundamentally, I don't know whether it'll drive us to a different set of values, as much more reaffirmation of the core values that really matter.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything else that you want to add before we close?
No, thank you, Maureen. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah, yeah, really appreciate it.